All right, ready to dive deep into the world of pen testing. We're going to be looking at Hacking with Kali Linux, a practical guide from back in 2018.
Yeah, this book really takes you step by step through using Kali Linux. I mean, it's got techniques that'll make you feel like you're in a spy movie or something.
Right, it's got everything from how to set up your own little hacking lab all the way to finding and exploiting vulnerabilities. Where should we even start with this?
Well, the interesting thing is this book, it jumps right into the methodology. Like before you even touch Kali Linux, it really stresses that you need a structured approach.
That makes sense. I mean, you wouldn't just start building a house without blueprints, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of structure are we talking about?
Well, they break pen testing down into three main types: black box, white box, and gray box. And it all depends on how much you know about the system before you start prodding it.
Okay, so black box is like you're trying to break into a safe, but you don't know the combination. White box is you've got the combination and the instructions. And gray box is, I don't know, maybe you've got a partial combination or a hint.
Exactly. And each one, it needs a different strategy, right? The book even mentions some well-known methodologies like OSSTMM, PTEs, and a WASP testing guide. These kind of give you a roadmap to making sure your tests are thorough, but also ethical.
So it's not just, hacking randomly. There's a real science to it.
Yeah.
Now, the guy also talks about setting up a virtual playground. They even recommend using these vulnerable systems like Metasploitable 2. Why is that so important?
Well, imagine you're learning to defuse a bomb. You wouldn't want to practice on a live one, would you?
No, probably not a good idea.
Right. So virtual machines like Metasploitable 2, they're like these safe, controlled environments. You can experiment with all these attack techniques without accidentally blowing something up in the real world.
Gotcha, makes sense. So let's talk about the star of the show, Kali Linux. Why is this particular operating system like the HE go-to choice for pen testers?
Well, first off, Kali is built on Debian, which is known for being super stable and secure.
So you've got a solid foundation to build your hacking toolkit on.
Exactly. And then on top of that, Kali comes preloaded with over 600 specialized security tools.
Wow.
It's like having a Swiss Army knife, but for ethical hacking.
That's a lot of tools. I'm guessing one of the most crucial parts of pen testing is gathering information about your target, right? The book calls this the art of reconnaissance, which I gotta say sounds a lot more exciting than just, Googling somebody's name.
Oh, you'd be surprised how much information is just out there, publicly available. The guide talks about open source intelligence, or OSINT. Think like searching public databases, social media. It's all about finding those digital breadcrumbs without actually interacting directly with the target system.
So it's like being a digital detective, right? You're putting together a whole profile
Yeah.
based on public info. Speaking of which, the guide mentions a tool called Metagoofle.
Hmm.
What is that all about?
Oh, Metagoofle is like a digital bloodhound for metadata. You know how you sometimes see like the author's name and other details kind of embedded in a file?
Yeah.
Metagoofle digs that stuff up, and sometimes it can reveal some juicy info, like usernames, software versions, even internal server names, stuff like that.
Wow. So even a totally innocent-looking PDF could be leaking all sorts of valuable information. That's both fascinating and a little unsettling.
It is. It definitely shows how important it is to understand metadata and how it can be used. Now, if you really want to unveil your target, we got to bring out another tool, Nmap.
Ah, yes. The guide calls this one the Swiss Army knife of network scanning. And they say something about using raw IP packets to map out the target's network. That sounds pretty technical. What's actually going on there?
It's kind of like you're speaking the network's language directly, bypassing all the usual formalities.
Ah.
Nmap uses these raw IP packets to get a really detailed view of the network, like what systems are connected, what services are running, even what operating systems they're using.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So we've gathered some information, we've scanned the network. What's next?
Well, now we dive into enumeration. That's where we really start to analyze those open doors we found.
Okay, so we found the castle, we've spotted some open windows and doors. What exactly is enumeration all about?
Think of it like this. You've got the keys to the castle. Now you need to figure out what's behind each door.
Okay, I'm following.
Enumeration helps you figure out exactly what services are running on those open ports and even what versions of software they're using. That's super important because different versions can have different vulnerabilities.
So it's not just about finding an open door, it's about finding the door with the rusty lock that's easy to pick.
You got it. An Nmap comes in handy here again. Its version detection capabilities are like having X-ray vision. You can pinpoint exactly what software is running on the target system.
Man, this is getting really interesting. We've mapped the network, found the open doors, and now we're starting to identify the weak points. So what comes next?
Well, now we're getting to the heart of pen testing, exploiting those weaknesses. But that's a story for the next part of our deep dive.
All right. I can't wait to hear more.
Welcome back. Now that we've sort of laid the groundwork, let's get to the exciting part, right? Exploiting vulnerabilities. This
Yeah.
is where all that careful reconnaissance, all that analysis, this is where it really pays off.
It's like we've been, studying the blueprints and now we're ready to actually crack the safe. So where do we even find these exploits? Are we talking about some like secret hacker forum?
Not quite. I mean, those definitely exist, but ethical hackers, they rely on these reputable sources. Things like ExploitDB, PacketStorm, the National Vulnerability Database. These are like libraries of known vulnerabilities, and they often even provide proof of concept code or exploits to show you exactly how to take advantage of those weaknesses.
So it's like having a cheat sheet for hacking, but for the good guys.
Exactly.
The guide mentions that Kali actually comes with a local copy of ExploitDB. And there's this tool, SearchSploit, to make searching super easy.
Yeah, having that local database really speeds things up. You can quickly search for exploits that match those specific software versions and vulnerabilities that you've identified. It's like having a targeted guide for the weak points you've discovered.
Very cool. Of course, using these tools ethically, that's paramount. No, breaking into systems you don't have permission to.
Absolutely.
Now, the guy also talks about this thing called the Metasploit framework. And it sounds like it's more than just a collection of exploits. It's like a whole platform, almost like a hacking operating system in itself.
It's a game changer for sure. Metasploit, it gives you this structured environment for pen testing. So you can develop, test, launch exploits, and it even has tools for, what happens after you've actually gained access.
Wow.
It's really like a hacker's ultimate toolkit.
It looks like the Metasploit framework, you can interact with it in a few different ways. They mentioned a command line interface, but also this thing called MS Console. What is that all about?
Hence console, that's like the heart of the Metasploit framework. Imagine like a command center where you launch attacks, manage your digital soldiers, which are your payloads, and even control those compromised systems. That's MS Console.
Okay, so let's say we found an exploit, configured our payload, and boom, successfully exploited a vulnerability. What happens next? I keep seeing this term interpreter pop up in the guide.
Think of Meterpreter as like a secret passage you've created into the target system. It's this really powerful tool. You can control the compromised system, run commands, upload files, even pivot to other systems within the network.
So it's like you establish a beachhead and then use that to launch further attacks. Man, this is starting to feel like a spy thriller.
Right.
The guide also mentions these post-exploitation techniques like privilege escalation and covering your tracks. Things are getting serious.
Yeah, privilege escalation. That's like going from being a regular user to being the admin. It gives you way more control, access to all the sensitive data. And then covering your tracks, that's all about hiding your activity so you don't get caught. Imagine like the digital version of wearing gloves and wiping down surfaces for fingerprints.
Pretty stealthy. It sounds like this post-exploitation phase,
Mm.
this is where attackers can, do the most damage. Like if they get access to a server or other critical systems, that could be disastrous.
Exactly. And that's why ethical hackers, we do these tests in the first place, to find and fix those vulnerabilities before someone with, malicious intent can exploit them.
So it's like a controlled burn in a forest. You're intentionally starting a small, manageable fire to prevent a larger, uncontrolled wildfire.
Perfect analogy. Penetration testing. It helps organizations build those defenses, make their systems more resilient.
This guide walks us through some examples of, actually exploiting the vulnerable Metasploitable 2 machine. What stood out to you as particularly interesting or maybe even, alarming?
Honestly, just the sheer number of ways a system can be compromised, it's pretty eye-opening. The guide covers everything from weak passwords and misconfigured services to these more complex vulnerabilities like buffer overflows. It really highlights how important strong security practices are.
It's like building a fortress. You gotta make sure every wall, every gate, every tower is secure, or else the whole structure is vulnerable.
Exactly. And what's even crazier is the world of cybersecurity, it's always changing. New vulnerabilities pop up all the time. Attackers are always coming up with new techniques. It never stops.
So ethical hackers, you guys have to be constantly learning and adapting to stay ahead of the game.
Yeah.
It's like being a martial artist. You got to keep practicing, keep refining your skills to stay sharp. What are some of the things that pen testers need to be aware of in this ever-changing landscape?
Well, obviously staying up to date on the latest vulnerabilities, all the attack methods, that's crucial. But it's not just about the technical skills, you know? You also got to be able to think like an attacker, anticipate their moves, understand their motivations.
So it's a combination of technical expertise and a bit of psychology. You got to get inside the mind of the attacker to figure out how they might try to breach a system.
Exactly. That's what makes penetration testing so fascinating, so challenging. It's this constant game of cat and mouse with both sides trying to outsmart each other.
We've covered a lot of ground so far, from the basics of pen testing to the really intricate details of exploiting vulnerabilities. We even touched on the post-exploitation phase, where things can get, well, really interesting and potentially dangerous. But before we wrap up, I think we need to dig a little deeper into the ethical considerations of using these really powerful tools.
Oh, absolutely. We can't just talk about the how-to without addressing the why and the potential consequences, right?
Right. We got to remember these techniques, they can be used for good or for bad. It's all about using that knowledge responsibly, ethically. I think it's time to take a quick pause to gather our thoughts. We'll be right back to finish up our deep dive into the world of ethical hacking with Kali Linux. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into ethical hacking with Kali Linux. Before the break, we were talking about what happens after an attacker gains access, that post-exploitation phase.
Right, right. For a lot of attackers, that initial breach, that's just the beginning, you know?
Yeah.
They might be after data theft, disruption of services, maybe even, full-on control of critical infrastructure.
Right.
Post-exploitation, that's where they really dig in. Try to gain more privileges, maybe spread to other systems on the network, really try to achieve those objectives, whatever those might be.
So it's like they've snuck into the castle, but now they're looking for the crown jewels and figuring out how to disable the alarm system while they're at it.
Exactly.
The guide specifically mentions techniques like creating backdoors and manipulating log files. What's that all about?
Okay, so imagine you're a thief, right?
Yeah.
And you want to keep coming back to the same house.
Right.
You might leave a window unlocked or maybe hide a spare key somewhere.
Makes sense.
That's essentially what a backdoor is in the digital world.
Oh, okay.
It lets the attacker maintain access to that system even if the original vulnerability is patched.
Sneaky.
Yeah.
What about manipulating log files? What's that all about?
Think of log files like a security camera recording. It's tracking all the activity on a system.
Okay.
Attackers, a lot of times they try to erase their tracks by either altering or deleting these logs. It makes it way harder for the defenders to figure out what happened.
Like a digital cover-up.
Exactly.
So they're not just breaking in, they're trying to make it look like they were never even there.
Yeah.
The guide also talks about pivoting, which sounds like a way for attackers to kind of use that compromised system as a jumping off point to reach other parts of the network.
That's exactly right. Pivoting is all about lateral movement.
Okay.
Once they've got control of one system, they can use that to, scan the network, look for other vulnerable systems, essentially hop from one to another, like using one compromised room in the castle to access all the other areas.
So it's not just about compromising a single system. It's about spreading that control throughout the whole network. This is where things can get really scary, right? If an attacker gets, access to a server, a domain controller, the damage could be significant.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why ethical hackers, that's why we do pen tests in the first place, to try to find and fix those vulnerabilities before a real attacker can get in there.
It's like a controlled burn in a forest. You're intentionally starting a small, manageable fire to prevent a larger, uncontrolled wildfire.
Exactly. Penetration testing, it's all about helping organizations strengthen those defenses, make their systems more resilient.
Well, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
It has.
It's amazing how much goes into penetration testing, from that initial, reconnaissance and scanning to the actual, exploiting vulnerabilities, and then this whole post-exploitation phase.
Yeah, we've only scratched the surface, really. But hopefully it gives you, the listener, a better understanding of how pen testing works and why it's so important, especially in today's world.
I think the key takeaway here is that, knowledge is power. And in the world of cybersecurity, that power, it can be used for good or for bad.
Mhm.
And it's up to all of us to use this knowledge responsibly, ethically.
Couldn't agree more.
If you're interested in learning more about ethical hacking, about penetration testing, this guide, this hacking with Kali Linux, it's a great place to start.
It is. And remember, this field, cybersecurity, it's constantly evolving. So continuous learning it's essential.
Right.
Stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there in the digital world.
That's great advice. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of ethical hacking with Kali Linux. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and stay vigilant.